Morning, everyone. Dwayne here. So what I'm really going to be talking about for this virtual conference video, and of course, all this will carry over to my research prospectus. What the primary text I'm going to be dealing with for this project is Frances Ellen Watkins Harper's Iola Leroy. Out of all the texts we read for this class, this one really stuck with me for some reason. I found the writing to be very engaging and the stories to be very engaging. And one of the things that struck me about this novel, when I read it originally, and of course as I was thinking about this project, it came back to mind, was the way that speech and language is utilized. I would argue that any novel that's written, anytime an author writes a novel, they don't do anything haphazardly, especially when it comes to what the characters say, how they say it, and what the implications behind it might be. And in considering those implications, what I really want to focus on for this particular project, and I do have notes in front of me, so if I refer, you see me look down, that's why. What I'm really interested in looking at is the nature of speech and language and how it's exhibited throughout the text. And specifically, I'm interested in looking at some of the different African-American slaves that are in the text. Specifically, I want to focus on Uncle Daniel the most, but at another section of my perspectives, I would like to look at a scene and some interactions that Uncle Daniel and Aunt Linda have and some of the things that they happen to say. And of course, also focusing on Iola and the way in which she utilizes language and how it impacts her desire to be an individual and to be a strong African-American woman who has her freedom now. So kind of like my working thesis, I guess, really ultimately deals with the utilization of speech in Harper's text and how it provides a clear indication of how characters in the novel obtain and retain identity. I believe very strongly that all these characters, when they speak in their texts, are speaking in a way, of course, to express themselves, but I think that they're doing so to kind of, in a way, say what they're saying to make sure that they're being true to themselves and that they're not, subscribing to other things in society that they may or may not need to subscribe to. Particularly looking at the different slaves in the text, again, Uncle Daniel and Aunt Linda being included here, the fact that they speak in more like folk speak, the vernacular that they're comfortable with as a group. The fact that they speak that way throughout the text, it really helps them hold on to their heritage, and also the way they speak kind of helps them hold on to their guiding principles and some of the different things in their life and beliefs that are really important to them. And with Iola, all of her speech and language that she utilizes and that she displays in the text, really I would say kind of helps her retain a sense of individualism. The way she speaks, what she says, she's saying to help her maintain a sense of self. But I would also argue that, and there's a little bit of tension for me here, she wants to be an individual, but at the same time, I think there might be the possibility that she wants to try to subscribe to some true womanhood notions, that she wants to try to be subservient, she wants to try to be respectful, but at the same time, she wants to still be her own person. I think, like I said, I think there's some tension, there's some potential conflict there that might be going on in the text. So that's kind of the working thesis. Some evidence. Of course, like I mentioned, I do want to focus on speech and language through a lot of the African-American slaves, in particular Uncle Daniel and Aunt Linda. With Uncle Daniel in particular, I would be interested to look at the earlier on in the text when some of the other slaves are going to be escaping, when Uncle Daniel makes it very firm and says, "No, I'm not leaving. I need to remain faithful. I need to remain I need to respect and obey my slave master. I need to do that. I need to respect the family. I've been asked to take care of the rest of the family by the patriarch. I'm going to do so, even though we as the reader might say, that's a bit naive. Why would you do that? And of course, there's also toward the end of the text when Uncle Daniel and Aunt Linda reunite with Iola and some of the other family and other characters in the text, when they're talking about, now that they're out of slavery, kind of the notions of social mobility, and there's also a mention of education. Again, I don't have the exact page numbers because it would take me a long time to present that in a video, but I do kind of want to touch on that. And again, I bring those examples to light to kind of show, they, through what they're saying in those two particular instances, are trying to retain a sense of self and are trying to, hold on to things that are important to them. And in many instances, especially the latter, they're trying to kind of make their lives better, but at the same time, it's kind of complicated for them. And of course, with Iola, what's really interesting about her is, like I mentioned before, she wants to be an individual, but I think at the same time, she wants to try to be a good woman, a good, respectable woman in society. In particular, a couple different instances when her speech is really interesting and important. When she is proposed to by Dr. Gresham twice. Not only does she, one, of course, reject his proposal, but she does it in a very respectful way. She, of course, wants to make it clear that she is her own woman and that she can make her own decisions, and she does, but she approaches it in a respectful way, and of course, she logically reasons with him. This is why this union would not work, and this is why it's important that we, keep that in mind. Also, another instance that I'm really interested in looking at is, her speech and the information she talks about at Mr. Stillman's house is really, really important. What she says and how she says it. In particular, I'm interested in the portion where she is kind of comparing the slave's plight to the plight of Christ and the crucifixion. That's a really powerful scene. And of course, everything that, Iola does with her speech, of course, like I said, it makes her, she wants to be an individual, she wants to be her own woman, but at the same time, I think she also wants to possibly subscribe to some of the things that society might have for her. But like I said, I think there might be some tension there. Might be somewhat problematic. One of the things I do want to talk about briefly too is the need for the project. Now, that's one of the things that we need to address in the prospectus. And what I really thought about when I thought about the notion of speech and language and identity is, and this may be a bit of a stretch, so some of y'all want to comment on it, give me some suggestions, please feel free to. But what I find interesting about, like today's culture is that one of the biggest areas where we try to express ourselves and kind of create a sense of identity is through social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it might be. We try to put out a social media almost like personality and identity that may be very much like who we are specifically, and it also might not be as well. So that's kind of what I'm interested in looking at, and also the kind of notion that readers and scholars might not necessarily see the connection therein, but I think the fact that we use social media as a means of communication to kind of retain or establish identity, or to create some kind of identity even if it's false, the fact that language is utilized in this text, at least in my argument, that it's being utilized to create identity as well. So it might be a bit of a stretch. If you have any comments there, please feel free to give them to me. And then real quick, some sources I've pulled. Of course, I've got the Walter article on true womanhood, Dankey's reading, writing, and resistance article we read for class, the Sundquist, the Chestnut text, The Conjure Woman, to Wake the Nations by Sundquist, Language, Discourse, and Power in African American Culture by Morgan, and African American Female Speech Communities, Varieties of Talk by Hill Hudson. And of course, with all these, I have stuff flagged. So I've done a good bit of research on this. However, if you all happen to have other things, that would be fantastic. I've got some other text too that I don't even have displayed here for this video. A couple questions I have though. One, I'm kind of wondering if there's anything else out there about Iola Leroy that might deal with this particular topic of language and language through identity and identity through speech that I'm not finding. Again, I've found a good bit of stuff, but I've come to find that, especially with journal articles, there's not always a ton out there on Iola Leroy that specifically deals with the text itself. So if any of you are happening to deal with Iola Leroy, I think, Rihanna, you might be, maybe. But if you are, please let me know. Maybe share those with me, and of course I can share anything with any of you. And also, one of the things I'm kind of debating, and I've kind of talked about it a little bit in this video already, is I'm kind of curious to see whether, like I mentioned before, whether Iola is actually trying to maybe grapple with the notion of being her own individual, but also trying to kind of subscribe to the notions of true womanhood, because it's kind of what she feels like she needs to do, or it might be appropriate. I'm not quite sure if that part of this argument might work as well, or if there might be another approach that I could possibly take within theory or within another literary trope or something like that. So if any of you happen to have any ideas there, I would most definitely welcome them. I think I've gone way over my time, so if you all have any comments, I would greatly appreciate them. I look forward to seeing what all of you have to say in your videos, and I will talk to y'all soon. Thank you.